Listen closely, because the next 8 seconds carry a truth men were never meant to hear. There is a house in America so large, so consuming, that it didn't just demand wealth, it devoured the man who built it. And tonight, as you listen, you will feel something most visitors to Biltmore never do. Not awe, not wonder, but the faint, unmistakable pulse of something watching you back from behind those limestone walls. The sense that the mansion itself remembers every secret it swallowed, because Biltmore was never just a home. It was a labyrinth of power. A monument built not from stone, but from obsession, inheritance, and a kind of unspoken hunger that ran through the Vanderbilt bloodline like a command. A hunger for control, for permanence, for a legacy too big for a single lifetime, so big it required a sacrifice. Men today look at Biltmore and see luxury, grandeur, a symbol of what money can build. But that's only the postcard side of the story. The truth is darker and far more instructive. The truth is that Biltmore stands as America's most elegant warning, a reminder that every dream built too large becomes a cage, and every dynasty that reaches too high discovers the cost long after the applause fades. Tonight, I'm going to take you somewhere the tour guides won't. Past the polished halls and manicured lawns into the hidden arteries of the estate, the servant tunnels, the boiler chambers, the silent mechanical heart beating far beneath the beauty. And deeper still, into the psychological architecture of the man who shaped it all. George Washington Vanderbilt, too. A man raised in wealth so vast it insulated him from the world, and then slowly isolated him from it. You're going to see how a mansion designed to be a retreat turned into an empire of responsibility, and eventually a burden no human could carry without breaking. You're going to see how power masquerades as comfort, how beauty disguises the machinery of control, and how the largest house in America became a monument not to triumph, but to the quiet, crushing gravity of ambition, miscalculated. By the time you reach the end of this descent, you won't look at Biltmore the way the world does. You'll see the truth behind the facade, and you'll understand why some doors inside this house were never meant to be opened. Every legend begins with a moment, a spark that seems insignificant at first, but later reveals itself as the pivot on which everything turns. For Biltmore, that moment wasn't the first stone laid or the first blueprint drafted. It was the instant George Washington Vanderbilt II stood on a quiet ridge overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains and felt something he couldn't name. He saw beauty, yes, but what gripped him was something deeper, something primal. A promise whispered by the land itself, build here, and you will never be forgotten. Men like George don't chase pleasure. They chase permanence. They chase immortality. And immortality always demands a price. The mountains stood silent, ancient, unmoved by human ambition. Yet George looked at them and imagined not a home, but a world he could control down to the last brick, the last blade of grass, the last flicker of electric light. He had been raised inside the gilded cage of Vanderbilt wealth, railroads, steamships, generational power that made Washington tremble and Wall Street bow. But in the quiet of those hills, surrounded by nothing but wind and forest, he found a new vision, something bigger. Something he thought he could master, but mastery is an illusion. What he did not see, what he could not see, was that the land was watching him back. And the moment he chose it, the moment he began pouring Vanderbilt money into these mountains, he stepped onto a road with no return. Because Biltmore wasn't built only with money, it was built with time, energy, identity, and the slow erosion of the man behind the dream. The first purchase was small, harmless, a few hundred acres, but then the hunger grew, 1,000 acres, 10,000, 20. Hundreds of abandoned farms, logged out slopes, dying forests. He devoured them all. And the more he consumed, the more the dream consumed him. That is the nature of creation when ambition runs deeper than wisdom. The creator believes he owns the vision, but in truth, the vision owns him. The estate swelled to 125,000 acres, larger than many European principalities. A kingdom built by a man who wanted peace, yet forged a machine that required constant feeding. George didn't realize it yet, but he had built the perfect trap, a sanctuary on the surface, an empire of responsibility beneath, a place so magnificent it demanded everything from its master. And as the first survey flags went into the soil, as the first teams of workers marched up that mountain, the quiet ridge that once felt like salvation whispered a different truth, one George wouldn't understand until it was too late. Some dreams don't belong to the dreamer. Some dreams consume the man who chases them. Before the first stone was ever set, the land had to be broken open, tamed, shaped, commanded into obedience, and that's where the facade of beauty begins to fracture. Because behind Biltmore's elegance lies a truth most visitors never imagine. This place was born not from quiet craftsmanship, but from industrial-scale domination, a controlled conquest disguised as architecture. In 1890, the ridge above the French Broad River transformed into something almost militaristic. Not a construction site, a campaign. 1,000 men arriving in waves, camps rising from the mud, machinery, rail lines, coal piles, timber stacks. The mountains echoed not with birdsong, but with hammers, shovels, blasting caps, iron wheels grinding against temporary tracks. This was not gentle building. This was an invasion. George Vanderbilt watched it unfold. Delicate and bookish, a man more comfortable with poetry than labor. Yet here he was, commanding an army he barely understood, building an empire he believed he could quietly govern from a library window. What he didn't see was how quickly the scale of his vision escaped the boundaries of intention. Because once you unleash a machine of this size, it doesn't stop. It doesn't slow. It doesn't bend to will. It accelerates. Foundations were carved deep into the mountain, trenches, pits, channels cut by men whose names would never appear in the history books, but whose sweat and broken bodies gave Vanderbilt his monument. Limestone blocks weighing hundreds of pounds arrived by rail, dragged by mule teams up switchback roads in cold that cracked skin and bone. Italian stonemasons, masters of craft, stood beside Appalachian laborers learning to shape stone under the watch of foremen who measured every joint to the millimeter. Precision wasn't optional. Hunt's architecture demanded perfection. Perfection demanded sacrifice. And every day the mountain took its due. Mudslides, collapsed scaffolding, frostbitten hands, tools snapping under strain. There are no official counts of injuries. There never are for projects like this. But a house this size is never built without pain, without a cost measured in more than wages. What fascinates me most is what this period reveals about George. Not the wealth, not the vision, but the psychology. Because once Biltmore's construction machine came to life, he could no longer stop it. Even the Vanderbilt fortune strained to keep pace. What began as a sanctuary was becoming a beast, one that required constant feeding, constant supervision, constant surrender. George didn't build Biltmore alone. He built it with the hands of 1,000 men and the slow forfeiture of his own freedom. By the time the walls began to rise, 3 stories of limestone climbing into the winter air, George Vanderbilt believed he had control. Believed that the design, the budgets, the schedules, the experts, all of it answered to him. But anyone who has ever built something massive knows the truth. The moment your creation grows larger than your grasp, you stop owning it. And it starts owning you. Richard Morris Hunt, the architect, brilliant, disciplined, revered, became the true commander of the upper world. Frederick Law Oersted ruled the lower, the land, the earth, the miles of wounded forest that needed healing. And George, despite his wealth, found himself drifting between their domains like a young king discovering his throne, was already occupied by men older, sharper, and infinitely more experienced. Hunt's blueprints were scripture. Every line, every proportion, every arch and window and hidden structural brace had meaning. He designed Biltmore not simply to impress guests, but to overwhelm them, to create a psychological effect George never fully understood. High ceilings that dwarfed the human frame. Endless corridors designed to elongate time. Grand halls that made every man, no matter how wealthy, feel smaller, quieter, more obedient. This wasn't just architecture, it was hierarchy. It was power rendered in stone. Meanwhile, beneath the grandeur, Olmsted shaped the land with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a general. He looked at the eroded slopes, the dying soil, the barren fields, and didn't see decay. He saw a challenge, a puzzle, a chance to prove that man could remake nature itself. And so he began the slow, relentless process of reforestation. Hundreds of thousands of saplings, terraces cut into cliffsides, creeks redirected, soils rebuilt from scratch. George loved the idea of healing the land. He didn't realize how long healing takes, or how much it costs. Because while the trees grew, the bills grew faster. Coal for the kilns, stone by the ton, imported craftsmen, engineers, supervisors, tools, housing, food for over 1,000 workers. Dozens of managers, endless delays, endless changes, endless demands for more funding, more resources, more time. And this is where the psychological trap tightened around George's life. He could not stop, he would not stop. Because stopping meant admitting the dream had grown beyond him. Admitting that Biltmore wasn't just a home. It was a force that fed on ambition, a force that rewarded surrender. A force that whispered to him day and night, keep building, or lose everything you've built. By 1893, the house was already too big to fail, and George Vanderbilt was already too deep to escape. By the mid-1890s, the house was no longer a project. It was an obsession, the kind that bends a man's spine, narrows his world, and eats years without him noticing they're gone. Every morning, George walked through the skeleton of his future, surrounded by echoing scaffolds and the metallic ringing of chisels biting into limestone. But what most men don't realize is this. When you build something massive, it doesn't stay outside you. It builds inside you. It rewires you. It owns you. Biltmore wasn't just rising from the mountain. It was rising inside George Vanderbilt's mind. Every unfinished room became a promise he had to keep. Every invoice became a chain wrapped around his decisions. Every delay became a judgment on his worth as a Vanderbilt. Because remember, his brothers built mansions for sport. They flaunted wealth, hosted galas, lived loudly. George wasn't like them. He wanted something grand, yes, but private, controlled, intellectual, a world shaped according to his inner order. And that's exactly why Biltmore became so dangerous to him. Perfection devours the perfectionist. He oversaw every detail, from the curvature of the grand staircase to the carvings on the banquet hall's triple fireplace. When craftsmen presented samples, he ran his fingertips along the grain like a man reading fate. When Hunt suggested additions, George agreed. When Olmsted requested more resources, George approved. Every request felt necessary. Every upgrade felt justified. But each yes tightened the noose. Bills surged, costs ballooned. And the Vanderbilt fortune, once thought endless, began feeling very finite. By 1894, the house was so enormous, so mechanically complex, it needed its own ecosystems. Boiler rooms the size of small factories, underground corridors stretching like arteries, generators humming day and night. The place breathed steam and coal dust. It had its own pulse, its own hunger. And whenever George walked the site, the workers, hundreds of them, would pause and watch him. Not with admiration, not with resentment, with the quiet recognition of men who knew something he didn't. A man who builds a palace this large is no longer building a home. He is building a life sentence. Privately, murmurs began among foremen, accountants, even Hunt's own staff. He's losing control. He's gone too far. This place will cost more to run than to build. But George pushed harder, faster, because he knew the truth long before he admitted it. If he stopped now, Biltmore would stand forever as a monument to incompletion, a public humiliation, a broken dream. So he made the same choice every empire builder ultimately makes. He sacrificed security for legacy, stability for glory, and himself for the vision. By Christmas 1895, the dream was finally ready to open its doors. But what George didn't know is that the moment Biltmore came to life, it would begin quietly taking his. Most stories about Biltmore end right here, with the triumph, with the glassy photographs of the house completed, sunlight warming its limestone skin, and the Vanderbilts smiling on the terrace like royalty. But the truth doesn't end with the house. It begins after it. Because the moment the final stone was placed, the real haunting started. Not ghosts, not curses, but something far more human and far more devastating. They don't tell you that George Vanderbilt, the man who built America's largest private home, slowly began to unravel inside its walls. The castle he created to escape the world became too big, too expensive, too demanding, a dream that had grown fangs. Servants whispered about it long before the newspapers did. How the library lights burned late into the night. How George would wander alone through corridors the length of city blocks. How he stopped hosting gatherings, stopped entertaining crowds, stopped trying to play the part of the cheerful millionaire. He had built a masterpiece, but he could no longer live in it. Every room required staff. Every garden required caretakers. Every acre demanded money. More money. More money. The house had become its own universe, and George was trapped at its center like a star collapsing under its own gravity. What's terrifying is this. The Biltmore didn't drain George's fortune. It drained George. And the people around him saw it. His wife Edith watched her brilliant book-loving husband fade. Not from illness at first, not from age, but from weight. The weight of running something too vast for any one man, even a Vanderbilt. There are letters, quiet, desperate, where George admits the home is becoming unmanageable, that the estate's pull is stronger than he is, that the dream might have been too large for the world it was built in. And then, as if the house had finally claimed its price, George died suddenly at just 51, a heart operation, unexpected complications. A man who should have lived decades more simply, didn't. Some say it was medical fate. Others whisper that a machine as massive as Biltmore doesn't let its creator walk away untouched. Edith walked the halls alone after that, and only then did people realize the largest private home in American history had cost its builder his life. After George's death, the estate didn't fall silent. It groaned. Because when the master of a world like Biltmore disappears, the world doesn't pause out of respect. It panics. Servants recall that winter as one of the strangest in the mansion's history. Doors creaked where they never had before. Footsteps echoed in halls no one walked. The lights flickered in rooms that hadn't been opened in months. Not because of ghosts, but because the home was designed for hundreds of people, and now only a fraction remained to care for it. Every empty hallway became louder. Every forgotten wing felt colder. Every night stretched a little longer. And at the center of it all was Edith, a widow standing against a fortress built for a king. The estate's finances were collapsing faster than she could repair them. Maintenance bills stacked like a second set of walls. Farms weren't producing enough. Timber wasn't selling. The staff payroll alone was a burden. It was becoming clear. Biltmore wasn't a home anymore. It was a beast that required constant feeding. But this is where the story takes a turn no one expects. Instead of running, instead of selling, instead of surrendering, Edith Vanderbilt did the unthinkable. She fought the house. She turned the estate into an experimental forest, partnering with the first American forestry school. She converted land into sustainable operations. She negotiated, strategized, brokered deals with a focus sharper than any businessman of her era. And then came her biggest decision, one that shocked high society. She opened Biltmore's doors to the public. Reporters called it desperate. Visitors called it unbelievable. Historians now call it genius. For the first time, everyday Americans walked through a mansion built by a dynasty they'd only read about, breathing the same air, touching the same railings, seeing the same dreams and tragedies etched into stone. What Edith did wasn't just survival. It was transformation. She took a monument that had crushed its creator and made it something the world could carry together. And yet, even with the crowds and revenue and restoration, there were still places of the house no one dared to touch. Parts of the basement sealed off. Rooms left exactly as they were the night George died. Whispers among staff of a presence in the library. Visitors claiming to hear faint footsteps on the grand staircase long after closing hours. Maybe memories linger. Maybe guilt echoes. Maybe a house that large never truly sleeps. Now listen carefully, because this is the point where the story stops being a tale of architecture and ambition and becomes a lesson in the quiet, insidious nature of obsession. Biltmore was not just a house. It was a psychological experiment on a scale no human could endure without transformation. The mansion's design wasn't accidental. Every corridor, every hidden passage, every high ceiling was a tool of control, over the senses, over perception, over the mind itself. A visitor wandering the halls feels awe, but a resident living day after day among corridors that stretch longer than the eye can follow begins to feel something else. Time dilates, decisions weigh heavier, even simple movements feel constrained, measured, observed. The house enforces discipline without words. The mansion commands obedience, and that is precisely what George Vanderbilt discovered too late. The same home he envisioned as a sanctuary became a mechanism that demanded vigilance, attention, and sacrifice beyond measure. The staff, the boilers, the forest, the gardens, the animals, every element needed to function in harmony, or the system failed. And failure had consequences not just for his fortune, but for his own sanity. Edith understood this intuitively. She didn't fight the house. She negotiated with it, bending its demands to fit within reality. Yet even she could not erase the mansion's underlying truth, that human ambition, when matched against infrastructure on this scale, is fragile. That perfection is a predator. That beauty and terror can coexist under the same roof, quietly feeding on the soul. And here's the darkest part. The public sees only the grandeur, the lush gardens, the glittering interiors. They see the result of decades of labor, investment, and ingenuity. They do not see the cost, the subtle erosion of identity, the constant pressure, the slow invisible surrender to an idea that became larger than the men and women who dared to make it real. Some secrets in Biltmore are still hidden in plain sight. The rooms left untouched after George's death, the forgotten servants' corridors, the records of financial strain that no visitor reads, they all whisper the same truth, that power, beauty, and control, when stacked to extremes, exact a toll, and that toll is invisible until it's too late. This is the lesson Biltmore leaves for those who dare to look beyond its postcard image. Greatness carries a weight few can bear, and ambition, without awareness, becomes a cage disguised as a dream. And now, halfway through our journey, I want you to commit to understanding the secret. Type in the comments so the house owns me twice. Do it. Lock it in, because recognition is the first step toward mastery, and the algorithm will witness your initiation into truths few are ready to face. Now that you've taken your first step into Biltmore's hidden truth, it's time to descend further into the veins and arteries of the mansion that no tour brochure will ever show you. Beneath its glittering floors, past the banquet halls and libraries, the mansion's mechanical heart beats relentlessly to boiler rooms the size of factories, coal bins feeding endless furnaces, steam pipes weaving through stone like veins carrying life and death alike. This is where the invisible workforce dwelled. Over 100 people labored constantly to keep the dream alive. Maids, cooks, footmen, engineers, carpenters, gardeners, each with their place, their timing, their role in a system so complex it could fail if a single cog faltered. And the fascinating, terrifying truth is that Biltmore was less a home than it was an experiment in organizational control. Long before anyone had a word for a systems thinking, every detail was calculated to enforce order. Call buttons embedded in polished wood, summon servants instantly. Hidden corridors allowed them to move unseen, like shadows obeying the mansion's silent will. Kitchens and pantries stretched beyond imagination, designed for efficiency rather than warmth. Bedrooms and parlors reflected human desire, but only as long as that desire didn't interfere with the machine. Step back for a moment and consider this. George Vanderbilt, who sought refuge in art, books, and landscapes, now had a life defined not by choice but by obligation. The mansion dictated the rhythm of his existence, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, it reshaped him. His genius, his intellect, his wealth, they all bent to the demands of a living architecture, feeding its hunger like a tributary into a river that could not be stopped. And the irony is exquisite. The very thing George thought would free him, this palace, this monument, was what trapped him. He had created a structure that consumed wealth, labor, attention, and ultimately the quiet that he had craved. Every addition, every refinement, every tree planted on Olmsted's terraces reinforced the mansion's claim. This is the lesson most visitors never perceive. Power is seductive, but systems are merciless. Control is an illusion when your ambition builds its own ecosystem. Biltmore teaches us that when a man tries to master beauty, economy, and nature simultaneously, the price is always more than money. It is identity, it is freedom, it is life itself. And if you've already felt the weight of this truth pressing in, good. That means you're paying attention. That means you are ready to go even deeper. Now let's talk about the mansion as more than stone and timber. Biltmore is not merely a home. It is a psychological instrument, designed not just to awe the eye, but to shape behavior, perception, and thought. Every corridor, every staircase, every hidden passage is part of a subtle system that enforces hierarchy, obedience, and order. The grand halls are easy to admire. But consider the invisible architecture. Service corridors painted institutional green, staircases narrow and unadorned, call buttons embedded in woodwork, and a boiler system that hums and pulses like a heart you can never see. These systems did more than keep the mansion functioning. They conditioned those inside to move, think, and act within strict parameters. Every staff member, every visitor, even George himself, became part of a living algorithm, bound by timing, sequence, and expectation. George Vanderbilt thought he controlled the estate, but in truth, the house controlled him. Its needs dictated his schedule, his decisions, his energy, his relationships. The estate demanded more than attention. It demanded surrender. And surrender, once given to something this vast, changes a man at the core. It reshapes priorities, erodes autonomy, and rewires identity. The hidden agenda of Biltmore was never written in stone, yet it was clear to anyone who studied its mechanisms. This was a system designed to perpetuate itself. It's a system designed to perpetuate itself. The mansion's beauty served as camouflage, masking the relentless machinery beneath. Guests marveled at the ceilings, the fountains, the gardens, but no one saw the invisible scaffolding of control, and that is deliberate. True power often hides behind a lure, because fear and obedience work better when disguised as wonder. And here's the terrifying truth. The mansion's influence extends even decades after George's death. Each new caretaker, each employee, each visitor is subtly shaped by the invisible rhythms he created. Even now, the house whispers its rules. Move here, look there, respect the hierarchy, obey the order. And if you ignore it, the system corrects itself, quietly, relentlessly. This is why Biltmore is not just history. It is a living study in ambition, obsession, and control. And now it is your turn. Internalize this. Understand it. Recognize that grandeur is not innocent, that legacy can be a trap, and that the very structures designed to serve humans can enslave them instead. The deeper you look, the more the mansion reveals its hunger, and the more you begin to see the dangerous line between mastery and surrender. To understand Biltmore fully, you must confront the hidden costs, the invisible labor that made the mansion breathe, move, and live. This is where beauty and horror intersect. Outside, the gardens flourish, the lawns stretch endlessly, and visitors marvel at stone and timber. Inside, however, the mansion relies on a system of human discipline that few ever see. Over 100 staff members labored constantly. Maids rose before dawn to light fires and prepare baths. Footmen moved like shadows along narrow service corridors, anticipating the needs of a family whose world revolved around order and precision. Engineers maintained the boilers and generators, machines that roared and hissed beneath the floors like dormant beasts. Carpenters and masons repaired, polished, and reinforced, often at the edge of exhaustion. And for each one, the mansion's demands were absolute. Slack was a liability. Mistakes could cascade, threatening the delicate orchestration of comfort and illusion above. Every ounce of effort was invisible to the visitors. They saw only perfection, a library with 10,000 volumes arranged with meticulous care, fireplaces that burned evenly across 65 hearths, a banquet hall whose ceiling soared 70 feet, reflecting candlelight on polished marble floors. And yet, for every glowing room, for every smile of admiration, there were countless hours of strain, injury, and mental fatigue hidden in the basement, the kitchens, the boiler rooms. What's more, this labor was not static. Biltmore required constant attention. Winter storms meant frozen pipes. Summer heat meant maintaining ventilation and irrigation systems. Seasonal changes demanded pruning, planting, and repairs. The mansion was a living entity that never paused. Its hunger was perpetual, and the psychological toll on George Vanderbilt immense. He could not escape the demands, even as he retreated into his art and study. The mansion's scale imposed a rhythm on his life: wake before dawn, check the boilers, meet with engineers, supervise deliveries, review construction, and negotiate with landscape managers. Every decision required resources, precision, foresight. The house dictated his life as surely as any overseer. Secure. Biltmore teaches a hard truth. Grandeur is inseparable from cost, and human effort is often invisible until it is gone. Every stone, every beam, every cultivated tree was secured through sacrifice, perseverance, and relentless management. Behind the elegance lies endurance, control, and subtle tyranny. To understand Biltmore is to understand that ambition, when magnified beyond the human scale, consumes not just wealth, but the people who sustain it, and eventually the dreamer who dared to imagine it. Imagine it. The financial story of Biltmore is a tale of hidden pressure, a lesson in how ambition can quietly strangle even the wealthiest. George Vanderbilt inherited a fortune that seemed infinite, but Biltmore demanded more than money. More than money. Every addition, every refinement, every tree planted, every brick set, carried a cost that multiplied far beyond the original budget. The initial construction estimate of $5 million ballooned. Materials had to be imported. Indiana limestone, European craftsmanship, copper roofing, exotic timbers. Logistics alone were nightmarish. Blocks weighing hundreds of pounds traveled by rail, wagon, mule, and hand to reach the ridge. Every step required oversight, supervision, and repeated verification. One mistake could cascade into thousands of dollars lost or months of delay. And then there were the operational costs. Boilers needed coal daily, gardens needed constant care, farms had to produce food, staff had to be paid. Even the minor systems, the call buttons, the elevators, the refrigeration, demanded engineers and maintenance around the clock. Biltmore in its grandeur became a perpetual financial engine, sucking resources faster than they could flow in. George's obsession with perfection compounded the strain. No expense was too great, no detail too small. What might have been a simple fixture elsewhere became a monumental enterprise here, and in pursuing excellence, he unknowingly created dependency. The estate could not function without constant investment, oversight, and labor. The cost was both visible in dollars and invisible in the slow erosion of George's personal freedom. After George's death, Edith faced this reality head-on. She didn't have the luxury of retreat. The estate demanded strategy, creativity, and sacrifice. Public tours became a necessity, not vanity, not hospitality, but survival. She transformed the house into a hybrid of museum, agricultural enterprise, and educational center. Revenue flowed in, but the mansion remained a machine demanding constant attention. Oh, the lesson is stark. Wealth can mask responsibility, but it cannot escape it. Legacy is seductive, but it binds as surely as it elevates. Biltmore's magnificence carries the hidden narrative of human limitation, of resources stretched to their breaking point, of ambition that cannot pause even when the dreamer is gone. And this is why Biltmore resonates today, not just as a building, but as a warning. Extraordinary creation exacts extraordinary payment. It is a mirror to the human psyche, reflecting desire, pride, control, and the unspoken cost of chasing immortality. Now we enter the shadows, the parts of Biltmore that even the most detailed histories barely touch. Beyond the polished floors, manicured gardens, and sparkling banquet halls, there exists a network of spaces designed for one purpose: to be hidden. Corridors, narrow staircases, and back passages crisscrossed the mansion like veins carrying life unseen. These were not merely practical, they were instruments of control, ensuring that the machinery of the house ran silently, efficiently, and without question. It is here that the mansion's whispers begin, not literal voices, though some swear they hear them, but the echo of human endeavor trapped in stone. Crews working night shifts in boiler rooms, cleaning endless floors, moving coal and water through pipes that groaned with every degree of temperature. A slip could cost a limb. A delay could disrupt the rhythm of the house. Every worker internalized the mansion's demands. Fear, discipline, and exhaustion became invisible architects alongside Hunt and Olmsted. And then there is the human cost that never appears on tour brochures. Stories passed quietly among descendants and staff hint at tensions, near misses, and injuries unrecorded. Tales of workers disappearing for days, found only exhausted or injured, are not myths. They are part of the mansion's dark infrastructure. The system did not forgive weakness. It did not compensate for fatigue. The house required obedience. Even the Vanderbilts themselves were not immune. George's obsessive oversight of the estate, his relentless pursuit of perfection, imposed psychological strain beyond comprehension. Edith, after his death, inherited not only wealth but the psychological machinery of a home designed to demand, to control, to consume. To maintain Biltmore, she had to engage with its hidden systems daily, its staff, its land, its mechanical heart. The mansion's influence never allowed true rest. And consider this, the mansion's scale creates its own hierarchy, its own invisible surveillance. In such a space, nothing escapes notice. Each footstep, each adjustment, each minor imperfection becomes a reflection on those inside. Over decades, this produces a subtle conditioning. You adapt or collapse, and those who adapt are changed forever. Biltmore is more than history. It is a living study of ambition, control, and human psychology. Every visitor sees the grandeur. Few perceive the machinery behind it, and even fewer understand the quiet, almost imperceptible ways the mansion continues to assert influence over labor, over legacy, and even over memory. Now understand this, Biltmore was never just a house. It was a machine of power designed to manipulate time, labor, and perception. Every decision George Vanderbilt made, from the placement of fireplaces to the orientation of terraces, was a decision that shaped behavior, reinforced hierarchy, and demanded compliance. The mansion imposed rules without words. It rewarded diligence and punished neglect. Its corridors and staircases were arteries of control, unseen but absolute. Hunt and Olmsted understood this intuitively. Hunt structured the interior to awe and to govern movement. Grand halls slowed the visitor, long corridors created anticipation, and hidden stairways dictated who could be seen and who could remain invisible. Olmsted extended the mansion's influence into the landscape itself. Winding drives, forested hills, and terraces choreographed every visitor's perception, forcing a psychological engagement with scale, beauty, and order. The estate became a system of subtle governance. Subtle governance. Think carefully about what that means. The mansion itself became an invisible overseer. Its design conditioned thought and behavior. Staff learned to obey without question, navigating corridors that funneled efficiency. Guests were guided into awe, primed to admire, intimidated without realizing why. And George, the master of the estate, became both controller and controlled. The larger the system grew, the less human authority mattered. The mansion's own logic dominated. And here is the terrifying insight. Any structure this massive, any system this complex, functions independently of the human who created it. Wealth, intelligence, and intention matter little once a machine of ambition surpasses comprehension. The Biltmore became self-perpetuating. The more it demanded, the more it shaped decisions, finances, and priorities. Even after George's death, the mansion's requirements dictated Edith's life. The estate's legacy was a form of subtle tyranny. In this light, Biltmore is not merely architecture. It is institutional manipulation embodied in stone and wood, a microcosm of elite control. It teaches the unspoken truth. When you build something beyond human scale, it ceases to be your tool. It becomes a force that shapes all who live within it. It is both a marvel and a trap, a testament to ambition and a warning about the invisible chains of power. Every visitor may marvel at the ceilings, the gardens, the fireplaces. Few notice the invisible currents of authority beneath. Fewer still recognize the lesson, that grandeur carries obligation, that beauty conceals discipline, and that ambition, when magnified, demands a toll beyond money. Now listen closely, because this is where the mansion reveals its most sinister dimension. Biltmore is not just a home, a garden, or a museum. It is a psychological labyrinth. Every corridor, every hidden stair, every vaulted ceiling exists not merely to impress, but to condition the mind. Those who dwell within learn, consciously or not, to operate under its rules, schedules, rhythms, and visible hierarchies. The mansion teaches obedience without speaking. George Vanderbilt experienced this firsthand. He sought sanctuary in art, in books, in the forests he loved, but the mansion demanded constant attention. Decisions piled endlessly, coal for the boilers, maintenance for the plumbing, adjustments for the gardens, supervision of hundreds of staff. Each layer of labor, each logistical choice, created invisible pressure, a weight that few outsiders could ever understand. Even wealth could not buffer the relentless force of an environment so vast. Consider the servants. The corridors were their arteries, the boiler rooms their heartbeat. Every footstep, every service call, every detail had to be executed perfectly. One misstep risked a cascade of failures. Fires unlit, food delayed, plumbing frozen. Over time, the human mind begins to internalize the mansion's tempo. Obedience becomes instinct. Autonomy is quietly eroded. The mansion molds those inside, shaping behavior without confrontation, without notice. And the Vanderbilts themselves were not immune. George's obsession with perfection, Edith's unyielding management. These were not choices as much as responses to the mansion's demands. The estate dictated life, drained energy, and enforced priorities. The larger the system grew, the less personal freedom mattered. Legacy, it turns out, is a subtle form of imprisonment when it is built at this scale. Even now, the mansion whispers its influence. Visitors sense awe, staff senses structure. The estate's rhythm continues to enforce itself. What George and Edith built was not just a house. It was a living mechanism of control, feeding on ambition, discipline, and devotion, discipline, and devotion. And in doing so, it teaches a hard truth. Greatness comes with invisible chains, and the cost of legacy is often measured not in money, but in the surrender of human autonomy. This is the lesson few ever confront. Ambition, when magnified beyond human scale, creates a system that can outlast, outcontrol, and ultimately outlive its creator. To walk Biltmore is to witness not just grandeur, but the hidden mechanics of influence, the invisible psychology of obedience, and the subtle tyranny of architectural perfection. Even in the present day, Biltmore remains more than a tourist attraction. It is a living testament to the relentless pressure of legacy. Every brick, every beam, every landscaped hill continues to exert influence over those who inhabit or manage it. Modern staff walk the same corridors, maintain the same boilers, and care for the same gardens as a century ago, following protocols that have been refined but not fundamentally changed. The mansion's rhythm endures, and with it the invisible rules of obedience and precision. Consider the modern operations. Biltmore employs hundreds of staff to keep the estate functioning. Every visitor experience is carefully orchestrated. Tours, exhibitions, gardens, and events, all choreographed to maintain the illusion of effortless perfection. Behind the scenes, thousands of hours of labor, maintenance, and planning are required to uphold the facade. In essence, the mansion still runs like a machine, and humans remain the indispensable components. The system is self-perpetuating. And here is the subtle horror. The mansion's scale continues to shape behavior, even now. Employees must internalize its protocols. They must anticipate needs, adapt to unforeseen circumstances, and maintain standards that seem almost impossible. Even the highest-ranking managers feel the weight of expectation. Biltmore has never stopped demanding, never stopped asserting influence, never forgotten that human effort is the core of its existence. Visitors, of course, see only the grandeur, the beauty, the elegance. Few recognize that every immaculate room, every thriving garden, every perfectly aligned corridor represents thousands of invisible decisions and sacrifices. Few realize that the mansion is not merely a monument to wealth or taste. It is a living organism, one that thrives on human attention, labor, and compliance. And this is the final lesson embedded in the mansion's survival. Structures created on the scale of Biltmore carry a force beyond their physical presence. They influence thought, behavior, and priorities. They impose demands invisible to the casual observer. They remind us that ambition, when extended beyond natural limits, perpetuates a system that controls even those who inherit it. Biltmore today is a paradise for the visitor, but a testament to the cost of creation, the subtle tyranny of perfection, and the enduring power of architectural ambition. It remains a lesson that the pursuit of greatness, if unchecked, is never without consequence. Now we step beyond stone and timber, beyond gardens and halls, into what Biltmore truly symbolizes. This mansion is not merely a historical artifact. It is a mirror reflecting the deepest truths about human ambition, power, and control. The grandeur, the endless corridors, the meticulously planned landscapes, they are not just aesthetic choices. They are lessons, warnings, and provocations wrapped in beauty. Biltmore demonstrates that ambition is both creator and predator. George Vanderbilt's vision was immense, yet the mansion itself became a force, shaping behavior, dictating schedules, consuming resources, and subtly molding all who lived within or around it. The same ambition that birthed art, science, and beauty also enforced vigilance, discipline, and surrender. This is the duality few ever confront. Greatness demands obedience, and to achieve the extraordinary is to risk becoming a servant to your own creation. Consider the psychological weight. The mansion's hidden corridors, the unseen labor, the operational machine humming beneath the surface, all act as silent enforcers. Staff internalize structure. Managers adapt to relentless cycles of expectation. Even owners submit to the demands they once imposed. And the visitor, unaware, is drawn into awe, a carefully calibrated emotional response. Biltmore teaches that control often hides behind attraction, influence concealed within admiration. It is also a cautionary tale about legacy. The mansion outlives its builders. It perpetuates its own requirements. What George Vanderbilt could manage with wealth and intellect became a constant force pressing against Edith. Today, it shapes the lives of staff and the expectations of visitors. Legacy is seductive, but it is also a burden, an invisible force that dictates priorities, behaviors, and energy long after the creator is gone. And here is the hidden truth. This is not unique to Biltmore. Any system, empire, or project built beyond human scale carries this silent weight. The mansion is a metaphor for all extraordinary endeavors. Wealth, influence, prestige. They appear magnificent, but behind the facade lies the machinery of discipline, control, and hidden cost. Only those who see it fully can understand the depth of power and the subtle chains that ambition creates. If you have followed closely to this point, you are beginning to see what few ever notice. The mansion is not just a home, it is a teacher, revealing the invisible architecture of human obsession, the psychology of control, and the inescapable laws of scale and consequence. Now we arrive at the heart of the mansion's secret, the part that transforms curiosity into understanding, awe into caution, admiration into revelation. Biltmore is not merely a marvel of architecture or a monument to wealth. It is a living testament to the dangerous interplay between human ambition and systems beyond comprehension. The ultimate truth is this: the mansion outlives, outlasts, and outcontrols even the most powerful humans who created it. George Vanderbilt believed he could master nature, labor, and art simultaneously. He built a palace in the mountains, an estate spanning hundreds of square miles, a system that demanded perfection at every level. Yet the mansion became its own entity, a force with invisible rules, hierarchies, and requirements that shaped the very lives of those who lived within it. The laborers, the family, the managers, they all became instruments in a machine that no one truly controlled. Even death does not release them. The mansion's influence persists, echoing across generations. And here lies the final, terrifying lesson. Ambition, when magnified beyond human scale, consumes identity. Wealth, intellect, and good intentions are not enough to escape the demands of a system built for grandeur. Each corridor, every hidden passage, every tree planted, every pipe laid in the boiler rooms is a strand in a network that binds human effort to an eternal rhythm of maintenance, oversight, and devotion. The mansion is beauty and tyranny intertwined. It rewards those who obey, punishes those who falter, and quietly reshapes those who dwell within its walls. This is the knowledge few ever grasp, that greatness has a shadow, and every act of creation carries invisible cost. Biltmore stands as both a triumph and a warning, a paradise for the eyes, a crucible for the spirit, a monument to the seductive, unrelenting, and transformative power of ambition. Those who see only the marble and the turrets miss the mansion's full story. Those who understand feel its gravity, its quiet insistence, and its invisible mastery over human life. If you leave this story changed, it is because you have witnessed not just a house, but a psychological, logistical, and spiritual force. Biltmore is a teacher of ambition, control, and the subtle tyranny of perfection. It is the silent overseer of dreams, the keeper of secrets, and the architect of consequences that last centuries. And now, having followed the mansion's dark path from conception to eternal presence, you know the ultimate truth. No human, no matter how wealthy or brilliant, can fully escape the systems they create. The mansion lives on, commanding, shaping, enduring, and so must the lesson. You have seen it. You have felt it, and now you carry its knowledge, a truth that changes perception, awareness, and understanding forever.